Horizon troubleshooting. So some tips, some guides, some pretty normal information about troubleshooting in general. A lot of it is straightforward, and you've probably seen it or heard it before as far as troubleshooting goes, but then we'll look at some specific examples of problems that you might find in Horizon. So today's objective is to look at Horizon troubleshooting methodologies and tips, look at Horizon performance issues, such as bandwidth and connectivity issues, or compute resource issues, and then Horizon infrastructure issues, common ones that might crop up. So troubleshooting the VDI or virtual desktop infrastructure environment, the big picture. There's key steps to effective troubleshooting. So what does that mean? That means that there's these steps are not just related to VDI, the general troubleshooting tips. Okay, so begin with a helicopter view. What does that mean? That means don't look at any one minute detail. Have a look at the entire environment and identify any potential issues before diving into anything specific. So like we mentioned in your design in the previous subject, if you know that you have these networks, and if you know that you have a single point of failure, maybe we need to look at addressing those single points of failure and look at potential causes of problems before you actually go to any specifics or components. Avoid the blame game. So obviously troubleshooting is about finding the problem, fixing the problem, and getting your systems up and running. No point saying, oh, it was his fault, he should have done that, or oh, I wasn't told about this, I found, this is how I found it. That's not the point, okay? So the point is that usually from a point of view of a support team, you are part of a whole team, meaning it doesn't matter who did it or what happened or how it's going to be resolved, you're part of the whole team. It's either your whole team is good or your whole team is bad or performing good or bad. So avoid blame games. In a new VDI or virtual desktop infrastructure implementation, faults are often attributed to the VDI itself. Okay, so there's no point saying, oh, Horizon's bad or VMware is bad or like internet's bad or this and that. Yeah, it's just what it is. Okay, you just have to find the problem, fixing it. So IT teams may waste time troubleshooting VDI instead of investigating the actual root of the cause. So basically what they're saying is just because you just implement VDI, and often you likely say, oh, that must be the problem. But maybe that's not the root cause. Common missteps. So over provisioning resources, what does that mean? That means you have more resources than you actually need. Adding more CPUs or memory to virtual desktops without understanding the issues. So what does that mean? So basically, if you add more CPU or memory to any individual virtual desktop, it means it's going to use those resources and you will not have enough resources for other virtual desktop instances or your other virtualized servers. So if you have your virtualization sharing the same host as your server virtualization as that of your desktop virtualization, just if you over provision your virtual desktops instances with resources, then it's going to rob the other services or virtualization environment with other resources. So this is often doesn't resolve the underlying problem. So adding more CPU resources to the virtual desktop without understanding the issue doesn't really resolve some of the underlying problems. Also, you could be focusing too narrowly, as in you're only looking at one thing, and that's the only thing you care about. Whereas if you actually consider all the other things that could be part of it, then you're able to more readily identify the issues. Remember that VDI, virtual desktop infrastructure, and Horizon are just one part of your larger system. Is your network configured correctly? Is your network performing correctly? Is your internet connection, especially if you're allowing for published desktops and virtual instances as well as other things accessible from the internet? Maybe everything is working fine on your inside, but what about your internet connection itself? Can it accommodate all the number of users you have connecting? Issues may arise from the network storage or even a specific applications. Logical troubleshooting approach. So all troubleshooting should be logical. What does that mean? It means that you don't just go look at this, look at that, look at whatever, and jump here to there to something else. you need to sort of follow the way information travels. So if, for example, I am dealing with communication, I need to visualize what devices, what infrastructure it's actually going through, and then confirm each of those steps is actually working and performing correctly. So consider all possibilities, including storage issues. So, we talked about shared storage, but just because you have the same shared storage as all your other virtualization, is that able to perform well enough? Okay, even if the storage is performing well enough, is now the network interface cards on your shared storage going to perform well enough? Because there's going to be increased load in the network I/O. What about networking faults? Okay, it doesn't matter how well your virtualization infrastructure works if your internet connection, where your clients from externally are trying to connect through, doesn't work well, or doesn't perform well, or it's too slow. So let's just take it back to our assignment, for example. This is Effie's Confectionery. They have a typical business NBN plan. Is that sufficient? Okay, is it sufficient? Would they need an upgrade to their internet infrastructure? Okay, so obviously we know about NBN with the fiber to the premise, fiber to the curb, fiber to the node, all those kind of things. Maybe we need to actually identify what kind of internet upgrade they might need to require as well, because we're not only virtualizing servers now, we potentially could be allowing people from work from home and to actually access their desktops over the internet. What about applications or Windows problems itself? Okay, what about if the program itself just doesn't run well? You can't attribute that to the virtual desktop instance itself. It could be just, it's an application fault. It might just mean that you have to update it, or you might have to actually apply a certain fix to it or configure it in a certain way. And what about if it's a Windows operating system problem as well? Okay, recognize that the same issue could occur in the physical environment as well as the virtual infrastructure. So what does that mean? So if you just say you deployed the desktop on a physical computer, will those same applications or same operating system or same network or same storage also cause a problem for the physical desktops as opposed to the virtualized desktops? So if they're going to affect their physical desktop in the same way, then the problem is not the virtual desktop infrastructure. It is how those different components are configured or set up, or the performance levels. So the other thing is identifying the scope of user problems, user issues. So scope means what does it affect? What doesn't it affect? Sometimes you have a problem, then you might not actually think, is this a problem that's affecting everyone? Or is this a problem that's only affecting one single person? Okay, obviously, if it's an issue that's affecting multiple users, you have to look at the components that are in common to everyone, such as the network, such as the virtualization infrastructure, such as the storage, such as everything that's common. But if it's just affecting one individual user account, maybe, is it what the person is actually doing? How they're using the computer? Is it the individual requirements of that user versus another user? Is it because of permissions or authorization problem, as in that user doesn't have enough rights or doesn't have the entitlements to be able to do something? So basically, how many users are affected? If it's a single user issue, investigate the individual's activity. What are they doing? Were they connecting from the same location or device? Did they install or configure anything on the desktop themselves? If you suspect a desktop issue, have the user log out and log back into a new desktop. So basically, that's that instant clone, right? So if a desktop issue, easy, just log out, it will be deleted, log back in, it will generate a new instant clone, and anything that's specific to the individual desktop will be eliminated. That's a quick and easy way, isn't it? So the advantage of that is that it's because of the stateless desktop model, which means, e.g. the instant clones, the desktop is rebuilt quickly and from a golden image, which means it should be perfect. Okay, so if it's an issue that's affecting that one desktop only, then logging out, logging back in basically refreshes. It's like having a new computer. Okay, if it's affecting multiple users, likely it might be likely infrastructure related. it the network? Is it the storage? Or is it some shared application? So if it's affecting everyone, you have to look at things which affect everything, not individual computer or desktop. And maybe some broader troubleshooting is required. Steps in if issues persist, okay? So if this is after a refresh, if you get them to log out and log back in, and then the instant clone, if it's still the problem is still there, investigate the desktop configuration itself, investigate the applications that's running on that desktop. Okay, are they going to cause any problems? Are they having any problems? If you find out the problem and it's to do with just the configuration, if it's to do with the applications on the desktop, then you need to apply the fixes by updating the golden image, because there's no point fixing the individual instant clones, because they will be deleted and deleted after you log out, and then next time you log in, those fixes won't be there. So you need to update the golden image and to resolve the issues. Push the update to ensure the consistency across all users, meaning once it's updated, you need to really make sure that everyone knows about this issue, log out, log back in to get the fresh image. Troubleshooting performance-related problems. So this is probably the most likely type of troubleshooting you might have to come across, especially with the virtualization of the desktop, because the thing is, instead of having one physical dedicated computer now to each user, now they're going to have shared resources, aren't they? So the actions of one user could impact the functionality of another user by the amount of resources they consume. Obviously, we spoke about having resource pools and reservations and limits and all those kind of things in the previous subject, so that you can sort of mitigate that a little bit by implementing those things. So some common challenges with performance issues. If you're getting frequent complaints, poor performance in the virtual desktop solutions, the usual suspect is that the network is often blamed for poor performance, but step back before troubleshooting. Don't just blame something without reason. Okay, don't forget, IT troubleshooting is a scientific method. What do I mean by that? What I mean is you have a theory of what is causing the problem. You have a theory, so therefore you implement an experiment by testing, by doing something, by changing configuration, by doing things a different way, and then you see if it's going to make any changes or improve or change what you're seeing. And if it has, and you can relate it back to your theory, then that is probably the reason. Okay, you can't just randomly guess. You can have theories based on logic. You can have experiments, which is the testing, and then you can actually have a summary of what you've learned. Some key consideration is it truly the network issue, or is the network merely a messenger? Meaning, is it just a symptom? Okay. Avoid wasting time on network monitoring tools or analysis without proper evidence. Basically, you can do a lot of things without proper evidence. The key takeaway is don't jump to conclusions. Investigate other potential root causes before you assume the network is at fault. What about understanding user-related reported issues? So it's how it is with users. They don't necessarily know what they mean. You know what I mean? So they say things in the weirdest ways. I'm sure you've heard instances like I know in my previous history, sometimes the user will say, "Oh, the hard drive is not working properly." Okay, when they say hard drive, do they mean the actual hard drive, or do they mean the box that the computer is in? Because a lot of people confuse that box, the case, which is the computer, and they call it the hard drive. So is it really a hard drive problem, or is it a computer problem? Okay, so that's really, you have to get to understanding what they mean. So most issues are first reported by end users often as vague complaints. Oh, my session is too slow. What are you doing? What are you doing at that point in time? What are you trying to do? What did you do before? And what do you mean by it's too slow? Is the internet access is too slow, or is opening applications too slow, or is it actually saving files too slow? What is the slowness, right? So getting down to the key nitty-gritty issues. So key questions to ask is the entire session slow, or is it specific applications that you're trying to use? Is it at a login? Is it a login delay or general performance issue? Is it slow at that login period, or is it throughout the whole thing? Is it a new problem, or is it something just happened before, or is it just something that you've noticed ongoing? Because if it's a new problem, then we need to investigate what has changed, what has happened. Did we implement something different? But if it's an ongoing issue, then there may be we need to look at the monitoring the performance of some of these resources. Gather useful information, so log details. So the key thing is always using a service desk type software. Record the time, the date of the reported issue. Use monitoring tools, which is covered later, to analyze what is happening on the environment at that time, because it might be corresponding to the person might be working at 3 a.m. in the morning on their virtual desktop, but that also corresponds with a scheduled backup at that point in time. So if we know exactly when things are happening, then we might need to correlate with what other events are happening. Okay, that's just one example, but it could be some other things as well, like replication or something else. Factors to consider: has the user activity or location changed? Well, if they're working from home all this time and it's fine, now they're working in a hotel, or now they're working somewhere else, maybe it's not the system, maybe it's where their location is, or even what device they're using. Okay, so for example, if you're using your PC and you've got Wi-Fi at home and it's working fine, but now you're on the road and you're using your your iPad, and you got the 4G or 5G connection, is that the issue? Okay, so you've got to know exactly what the detailed specifics are. Example: performance is fine in the office but poor at home. Well, if it's good in the office and poor at home, I would suggest it's something to do with your home, isn't it? Yeah. Okay, so that's right. Home broadband may be the root cause, not internal network. Okay, so if you got a very bad home broadband, like for example, I know my sister-in-law lives in McGill, and their internet is so slow for some reason. Okay, it might be because because I know that area had a history of slow speeds and old infrastructure. I think they're fixing it, but that might be the cause. Adjustments to mitigate issues. So what you can do is adjustments to reduce the issues. Modify policy settings to reduce bandwidth heavy features, and that might improve their experience at home. Or or we can suggest that they improve their home broadband potentially. Let's say they got ADSL at home instead of broadband, you know what I mean? Instead of NBN, should I say. So obviously, that might not be suitable. Okay, just imagine they were using something that's really bad. What about non-virtualized performance issues? What are non-virtualized issues? Okay, issues unrelated to virtualization, e.g. the hypervisor or the virtual machines or the virtualization infrastructure. These problems could occur both on virtual and physical desktops. So what does that mean? So these problems may not have anything to do with the fact that it's virtualized. Because if the same problems can happen both on virtual computers and physical desktops, then it's not a virtualization issue. It could be just a issue with the program, the operating system. Okay. Examples of non-virtualized issues could be log-on delays, and that might be the fact that on a physical machine, your domain controller is unavailable. Okay. Or you just turn on your computer and your network switch is still learning your MAC address, that kind of stuff. Okay. So some other things could be application freezing, crashing, or slow loading. Well, if that's just the application problem itself that would happen on a physical machine and a virtual machine, then you've got to investigate that. OS crashes or blue screens, performance slowdowns or permission errors. If it's a permission error, it doesn't matter if it's physical or virtual. If you don't have permission or you don't have permission, right? Benefits of virtual desktops for troubleshooting. So some benefits quite easily is that it's got quick resolution. If it's a desktop issue, if it's a specific desktop issue, log out, log back in, get a new desktop, fixed, if you know what I mean. So instead of actually going to a physical machine and then trying to diagnosing the problems, trying to fix the problem, or even trying to redeploy the physical desktop machine, that could take hours. Basically log out, log back in, and you've got a new desktop already, haven't you? Okay. Scalable fixes, so updating. So basically, if you know it's a common desktop issue, then if I update the golden image or patch the golden image to fix the problem, then that means it's going to fix everyone's problem. But if you look at this physical classroom right now, there's 20 odd desktops, and if there's a common problem, What does that mean? That means I might have to go to each one of the desktop and apply the fix. Even if I can use group policies to push out the fix, it would have to be done on each machine. And if a machine is not turned on for many days because that happens to be the back corner one that no one wants to sit on, then that's still going to add the problem next time, isn't it? So it's easily, so basically update and patch the golden image. It will resolve issues affecting multiple users, and it's easily rolled out operating system or application updates across the environment. Bandwidth, connectivity, and network issues, some common challenges. Network issues are intermittent. Ooh. You know what? Do you know what intermittent means? Sometimes it's a problem, sometimes it's not a problem. Yeah, so like that's the hardest one to diagnose. If for example you can ping something, it's yes or no, right? So if you can, there's no problem. If you can't, there is a problem. But when we're talking about intermittent problems, it's more like, oh, today I can, tomorrow I can't. Oh, now I can. Oh, now I can't. It's those things that's not always there. So how can you be certain? They're the hardest ones to diagnose. So factors that might be, so these are connectivity and networking issues. If networking issues that are intermittent are the really hard ones. Factors that might be impacting performances includes number of users online. We should know that. The more users we have, the more competition there for network resources or any resources. What about user activity patterns? So let's say that, hey, the number of users or the amount of network bandwidth consumed throughout the day goes like that, then we got to see that right on the top of the graph, if it's fluctuating, is maybe when we have the problems. If it corresponds with that, then maybe it's something like we're running out of resources at that point in time. Some key diagnostic steps is change the network, checked for updates like new firewalls, VLANs, and bandwidth restrictions. So if someone's configured that, so remember, if you're working in a large environment, it might not be you for everything. You might not be the only system administrator or network administrator. Let's say someone, without going through the right change management methodology, they implemented some updates like a new firewall, or it configured a new VLAN or the trunking ports, or change the trunking ports, or change some bandwidth restrictions. That might have unforeseen consequences. That might relate to something they won't see, but you do see. Okay, so, and don't forget, like, remember when Optus had that outage earlier this year? Optus mobile network, yeah. So that's exactly what happens. I think in Singapore, they did some sort of routing update, a routing configuration update, and there was an error in it, and it propagated to all the devices on the Optus network and was down for like a weekend or something like that, if you remember that. So basically, that's obviously is a well-known published fault with a change management. Someone didn't test it properly, obviously. Connection types. Okay, so the next thing we've got to consider is, is the person having problems, are they in a wide connection? Are they using Ethernet? Obviously, Ethernet's faster than wireless, isn't it? But also, we know that wireless is susceptible to interference as well. So therefore, just if it's a performance issue is to do with wireless over wired, we need to investigate whether it's a wireless is performing to the wireless standard, or if there's interference which is slowing it down. Because, like, for example, if you have multiple wireless networks all occupying the same frequency channel, then obviously that's going to slow down everyone's performance. Use proximity to wireless hotspots, Wi-Fi hotspots, or outdated protocols. Network configuration. There's quality of service on switches. Are they impacting what you're trying to access? Do you even have quality of service implemented? Drop packets indicating hardware issues or failed routers. Bandwidth sufficiency based on the design. So if you know there's a bottleneck in your design, that might be stopping all of these. Don't forget, all your virtual desktops are running on the same piece of hardware, same piece of physical network, and same network interface cards. If you don't have sufficient things, so let's say you might have 2 or 3 network cards at 10 gigabits each, but then you're all connected to the same physical switch, and that physical switch has a 100 megabit uplink to something else, then it doesn't matter how that is, it's going to be drop back to the slow speed there, isn't there? So identify any bottlenecks. For remote users, so people not on site, ensure internet connection is sized correctly for branch offices or remote locations. So obviously, if it's on a different location, then the interconnection between the two sites must be sized correctly. If it's obviously they're working from home or something like that, that's something to investigate. But obviously, that's not necessarily doesn't become your problem at that point in time. It might be their own connection that they must improve. Optimize protocols for reduced bandwidth. So turn off high-end graphics capabilities. So if you're using it from a remote location and you have lower bandwidth, maybe that's the first thing you need to limit. So it's a bit like us having that Teams meeting, for example. And if you have a slow bandwidth, you just might mute the video to actually improve the performance, right? Correlate user activity logs with Horizon Connection server events. So obviously we need to look at the logs to identify any root causes. All right, so if we have some more common problems, what if you have a black screen on connection? Or maybe it may be that PCO-IP protocol, which works on that port, is blocked. Okay, if that's blocked, maybe use the firewall rules to unblock it. Session disconnections. Is there high latency and packet loss caused by disconnects? So obviously, every time you might have these. So basically, you might have a connection which has got a fault. So it might be on off on off. Have you heard of those network cards which are sort of like flapping? That term is flapping. It's sort of losing connectivity every now and then. It could be a fault there. Configure adequate reconnection time. So maybe the latency is to do with the reconnection time being too long. Poor resolution images, limit bandwidth effects of image quality. Use policy to adjust the image quality based on user location. So maybe if they're on site, they have high quality. If they're off site, they have reduced quality. Some best practices is to collaborate with the networking team. That's assuming you're not part of the networking team already, because in larger organizations, there might be a difference between the network administration and the virtualization infrastructure administration, but they should be working closely with each other. Deploy some end-to-end monitoring solutions so you can monitor the whole journey, not just part of the network. Use quality of service to prioritize bandwidth-heavy tasks. What about compute resource issues with CPU and memory? So key tools for performance management is the vRealize operations for Horizon. So that's another suite of software. It monitors performance utilization over time. There's also this other one called Liquidware Stratosphere, which provides a baseline metrics for assessment phase and ongoing user experience management. So these are additional software. Memory utilization best practices. Avoid overcommitting memory. So again, if you allocate too much memory to each one of those systems, then there's less memory for others to use. So allocate memory carefully to each virtual desktop. And don't forget, if you allocate too much, your virtualization infrastructure might start using virtual memory, which is very slow. Size the host to ensure that total memory allocation is less than the host physical capacity. Let's say your host has 128 gigs of RAM. You don't want all the instances to add up to be more than 120 gigs of RAM, for example. Consider host failures. Ensure remaining servers can manage increased load. If you remember back when we talked about high availability, if the servers, one fails, some of your critical servers are restarted. But you should know that in our configuration, we have all our ECXIs under the same cluster, so those instances could be started on any cluster member. So if one cluster member fails, that means all of those instances will be on the other cluster member. Can that cluster member manage with this increased workload? If it can't, then you may need to increase the amount of the host. Troubleshoot memory issues. Like I said, if you don't run out of physical memory, then it starts swapping, which is using virtual memory, or balloon filing. Balloon files, if you remember in the virtual machine itself, it actually reduces the physical memory and creates a balloon file, which is virtual memory. It indicates insufficient memory. And swap or ballooning uses the hard drive, not RAM. Yeah, paging, exactly. So that's very slow. So in vSphere, it's called swapping or ballooning. In Windows, it's called page file. In Linux, it's called the swap partition. Okay, they're all virtual memory. The end result is a slow performance compared to physical memory, because we should all know that physical RAM is way faster than any storage, such as hard drives or even solid-state hard drives. Increase memory allocation if needed, or analyze memory demands patterns. So obviously, if you realize they don't have enough, but you have capacity, you can increase it, okay? Or give more capacity, or get more capacity on your host. CPU utilization best practices. Monitor CPU ready metrics, so keep CPU ready below 5%. Allocate CPU with a maximum peak of 10%. Troubleshoot the CPU issues. Check baseline data and post-issue data. Identify the causes, like new application require more CPU capacity, or the incorrect sizing of the CPU on each virtual machine. So this, just in case this didn't make sense, check baseline data and post-issue data. So basically monitor what is the baseline CPU usage, and after you fix the issue, what is the CPU usage. Some growing pains. So like anything, like, you know, when you have something new, you don't know how it's going to work perfectly. Okay, so sometimes performance issues may not be straight away noticeable. Basically, sometimes as you increase the amount of workload on the system, for example, if you've got more users, there's more user load, then your host and your systems or infrastructure may not be able to cope with that. So this is where you have to sort of keep on monitoring it and sort of do preventive maintenance, which means to increase the amount of resources before you reach the limits. What if there's new or updated applications? So for example, if we were using Windows 10, now we're going to switch to Windows 11. Is there more system requirements on each one? If it is, then obviously that just reduces the amount of desktop instances we can host at any one time without increasing the amount of physical resources. So regular reviews of performance data are essential to avoid any issues. Importance of disk performance. So disk performance, obviously we talked about the shared storage. That's where our virtual hard disks are stored. That's basically what you're reading and writing to. So this for performance issues, as we all know from our virtual machines on our desktop with the SSDs versus mechanical hard drives, if the disk is too slow, it can cause lots of problems. This performance is crucial to your environment as your environment grows, especially with the increased number of instant clones and more end users. The key metric to monitor is disk latency. Latency is lag. Okay, this latency standards, is acceptable latency is that it's less than 25 milliseconds for general environment. Less than 25 milliseconds may still be unacceptable if it's for disk-intensive applications. Factors to consider: the type of applications users are running. Okay, if they're using something inappropriately, then not just inappropriately, but if they need to run applications that shouldn't be run in a virtual desktop environment, then that's going to be, they might be the exceptions to the virtual desktop environment. They might be the ones that get a physical desktop. Okay. The end user's perception of the performance, it's also like what they're used to. Okay. Key takeaways: monitor disk latency regularly to ensure the acceptable performance. Make adjustments based on the end user needs and the specific applications they run. Here are some Horizon specific issues. Okay, so overview of Horizon infrastructure. Horizon infrastructure components are generally reliable, but it's not immune to failure, like anything. There's no perfect system, no system that will never fail. Every system will fail given enough time. Some design considerations: minimize failure points in your overall design. That's like us saying minimize the single points of failure. Where you have one of something, then that one of something could fail and take down your whole system or reduce your whole system. So therefore, if we're talking about network cards, having one network card as uplink to your production network is probably not a good idea. First of all, for the performance. Secondly, for the failover. So always have redundant hardware, redundant links, and wherever you can, remove that single point of failure. Ensure high availability for all Horizon components, including supporting infrastructure like databases and Active Directory. So don't forget, we're using Active Directory group for entitlements, aren't we? So therefore, if you've only got one domain controller that fails, no one can access anything as well. So it's not just Horizon infrastructure, it's everything that else we need as well. Key focus: regularly assess and troubleshoot components to maintain reliability and availability. So yeah, it's not one and done type situation. We have to do a regular review and troubleshooting. Implement redundancy and failover strategies to prevent service disruptions. So, for example, in the Horizon console dashboard, it provides a system health section for monitoring. If you click the view button to access the detailed health metrics, we can use the system health feature to track potential infrastructure issues to ensure clear operation. So, for example, here we can see there's a status which is red. Okay, and it's just like any other thing. Okay, so let me zoom in if you're finding it hard to see. Yeah. So basically, you can see that status is there's a problem, but this is not a real problem. This is that unsigned certificate. Okay, but you can see the service status is green, but it's just a problem because that's using a self sign. You know, we talked about the self sign where you're going to have all those problems that we've seen, just not problems, but those warnings. Yeah, that we see all the time. So here are the components. Here are your remote desktop server farms, your vSphere components, and your other components. And basically from here, we can actually look at some problems. Okay, so you can see there's 8 issues in this example. And basically from here, we can explore some of those. There's a help desk feature. So there's an integrated tool, allows IT admins to search for specific Horizon users and check their session status, their resource usage, and then the purpose is to quickly identify and resolve issues when the end user contacts the help desk. So if we look at this from here, so obviously we would go to the pod cluster, we'll search for the user, for example, the user entitlement, and then from once we search it, we can see let's see, enter the username you want to search, and then we can see what session, where they're connected, if they're having any issues. Okay, we do this by logging onto the Horizon console, and obviously we need appropriate permissions, and we navigate to the monitor section into the help desk section. Oops. And then also from the help desk section, once we click into that user, we can see that this user is looking at the session CPU usage, the host CPU usage. So obviously the session should always be lower than the host, and you can't fix that. Same as this, session memory usage and host memory usage. Well, you can see this host is quite high, isn't it? Okay, it's getting high up there. So maybe the amount of host memory usage is affecting this user. The latency, which is nothing. So this is just an example. So you can see there's no latency as well. This performance, you can see there's a bit of a peak here. And that was a read peak. I reckon that's when the instant clone was launched. And then after it's launched, it's settled down, and you can see it's not much. Okay. Remember, we said the acceptable latency was about 25 milliseconds. You can see that most of it's way below that. And I reckon this was the initial launch. You can see here the IOPS. Remember, that's what we've been talking about in our virtualization environment, in our desktop virtualization environment. We talked about SSDs versus hard drive, the input-output operations per second. That was a big requirement for our SSDs, right? So obviously, if we're talking about 10 IOs per second average, this is average. That means this is what this desktop session is using, which is what we expect. That's very low, isn't it? If you remember, our SSD is capable of tens of thousands IOs per second. So basically, if we're talking about this performance, that's well within it, but it all stacks up. Well, what do I mean by stacks up? Meaning if we have 20 users, then it's 20 times that, isn't it? Overview. So basically, this oops. So this is an overview of the desktop help desk feature. It's a free tool which is available to download from here, and you can actually use it to provide additional features for managing and troubleshooting Horizon user sessions. Additional help and support. So obviously, official support, you can go to the VMware Global Support Services to log a call for immediate support. Obviously, we talked about the subscription plans and so forth. So basically, if you have all that, then you can log it. Unfortunately, for you guys who are using just the trial version, you're not going to be able to get the support for yourselves unless you have a production environment. Okay. VMware will support and help you support and assist with resolving faults. There's also online communities, so that's a lot of the time. This is what you will use for yourself. Carl Stolhoods, I can't pronounce it, has a blog, which is a comprehensive resource for Horizon and gives you advice for best practices. VMware community, you can access forums, which is like any other forum. You ask questions, there might be persons that responds, or you could just search for previously asked questions, which might be exactly the same as yours. I would suggest that you always search for a question before you ask a question, because what happens is they'll point you to the other question that someone else has already asked, and that can be annoying, if you know what I mean. So you should always try to practice searching before you ask. Yeah, quicker for you to get a response as well. So yeah, EUCV Expert Directory, so the directory of VMware Digital Workspace Specialists. So this comes here, and at this website you can go get some more advice and help as well. So summary, so we had our overview of the troubleshooting approach. So like we said, have a high level general overview, understand the bigger picture instead of blaming on your VDI. Investigate infrastructure components rather than just the VDI, so it's not always just the virtual desktop infrastructure. Keep troubleshooting elements, so we looked at performance issues with CPU, memory, disk utilization, network limitations. We should pinpoint whether the issue is user specific or widespread. We should treat the issues as a desktop issue. Remember, many issues occur both in the VDI as well as the physical desktop. And we looked at some resources where you can get help and you can use to sort of monitor your performance, monitor troubleshooting individual sessions with the Horizon Help Desk tool. We had additional resources that you can get to ask questions and look up information from the community. So that's the end of the presentation. So like I said, today, really, that's the last topic of the whole course. And obviously, all of you guys should be either finishing off or almost finished your assessments.